Isn't everyone born in a country a citizen?
Well, this depends on the meaning we give to citizenship. If we interpret citizenship as a status of full and equal membership in a self-governing territory or a country, then no. Not everyone born in that country is a citizen. This definition is closely linked to nationality and the idea that citizenship will provide you with full access to rights, including your civil and political rights. In that case, each state determined who has the right to have or to acquire citizenship. This is commonly referred as nationality law, and that's a commonly understood concept in public international law. Broadly speaking, nationality law is based either in jus sanguinis or in jus solis, and in modern days in a combination of both. Jus sanguinis is the principle of nationality being transmitted by one or both parents, or being transmitted by blood. This still is the most traditional form of transmitting citizenship. It is guaranteed and it's defined in international law, but still each state determines how and whom can transmit citizenship. Jus solis is the right of anyone born in a territory to acquire the citizenship of that specific territory or country. As an unconditional right, it's becoming less and less common. For example, nowadays no European country grants unconditional birthright citizenship. And in the world, only about 30 countries grant citizenship regardless of the status of the parent, meaning that only about 30 countries grant citizenship to the children of undocumented migrants. Nowadays, the majority of countries will use a mixture of both systems, of a mixture of jus sanguinis and jus solis. They will decide which person born in the country will have citizenship. They will decide whom in that country can transmit citizenship or who can transmit citizenship abroad. And they will also set out rules on how to acquire citizenship over a period of time. To give you examples, in the US, every person born is an American citizen. So we can say that the US operates a jus solis system with automatic birthright citizenship. In France, the state set out different rules depending on the nationality and the status of parents. So French citizens, they automatically transmit French citizenship at home or abroad. So that's a basis of jus sanguinis. But also, children who are born in the state, they can choose at the age of 18 whether or not they choose to acquire French citizenship if their parents have a different one. So that's a principle that comes out of jus solis. Similarly, in other countries like Greece, the state facilitates access to citizenship for whom they call ethnic Greeks, so people who have Greek ancestry. And at the same time, they allow for people of Greek citizenship to transmit that nationality abroad. This is what we sometimes call diasporic citizenship. But on the other hand, other countries will allow only certain nationals to transmit citizenship. For example, in Saudi Arabia, only men can transmit citizenship and not the woman. Because of this mixture of rules and so on, it can result sometimes that children are born stateless. So statelessness is a status in which one person cannot claim citizenship from any state, or at least that they cannot access effectively that citizenship. And why does that happen? Well, it happens because of different interpretation of nationality law, or because of administrative barriers to enforcing your right in nationality law. So for example, a Saudi Arabian woman who has a child with a foreign man cannot transmit Saudi citizenship. If the father of that child, by virtue of living abroad, cannot transmit citizenship or will have administrative problems in transmitting that citizenship, this will result in the child being stateless. So, as you can see, nationality and the construction of the nation state are very closely connected. That's why states, particularly states that were formed more recently, they value the concept of ethnic citizenship, or in the same way, diasporic citizenship. So it's very important to loosely construct a nation around ethnicity and around citizenship for that particular category of people. Similarly, from a historical point of view, there has always been a link between one territory and the people living in that territory. So nationality and citizenship has always been interpreted as that of the people who live in that territory. But again, the concept of nationality and the concept of nationality law has been evolved, and that's why we see that the two main concepts of jus solis and jus sanguinis have been evolved, and now countries operate a mixture of them. Now, partly the reason why citizenship and nationality law change is because of the phenomenon of transnational migration. In his work, Baubach will argue that migration challenges the interpretation of nation state, and it challenges the interpretation of national identity. So as a result, citizenship regimes have evolved to make sure that they determine who's granted citizenship, who is restricted from accessing citizenship, and who is refused from accessing citizenship. So certain categories of people will be outside of the realms of the citizenship of certain countries. One specific and interesting case is that of Ireland, which since its independence, since the creation of the Irish state, operated an automatic birthright policy, meaning that every person born in the island of Ireland was an Irish citizen. But in 2004, mainly in the middle of discussions about the numbers of immigrants coming to the country, the government sponsored a campaign for a referendum to amend citizenship law. After that referendum, they stopped automatic birthright citizenship, meaning that Ireland was the last remaining country at the time to do so. And that restriction and the change in law meant that certain people in Ireland, or children of certain people in Ireland, could no longer access Irish citizenship. While at the same time it remained unchanged the fact that Irish citizens, they could transmit their citizenship abroad. So at the same time as it restricted the access to citizenship of certain children, it also did not provide for mechanisms that they could through which they could acquire citizenship at a later stage. So one unadverted consequence of the Irish citizenship referendum was the creation of the undocumented Irish child.
Do undocumented children have rights?
Undocumented children have rights. But here it is important to distinguish what we perceive as rights and what we mean by having rights. So if we look at it from a philosophical stand, we all have rights. This is the idea that human rights are inalienable, that everyone have the exact same rights. For example, including children, they have the same rights as adults. But in order for those rights to be tangible, they have to be accessible and they have to be guaranteed to you. So basically we say that you have to be able to realize your rights. So that's when we start talking about political human rights as opposed to philosophical human rights. So basically meaning that those concepts that we define as, our universal human rights, they have to be legislated for, they have to be protected, and more importantly, they have to be enforceable. So that the broad intentions behind the creation of our international human rights instrument was exactly that, was basically to allow individuals to realize their human rights. So, for example, when Hannah Arendt talks about the right to have rights, she's specifically talking about that. Hannah Arendt was a political theorist. She escaped and she survived the Holocaust. And a lot of her work was deeply marked by what happened in the Second World War and the horrors of the Second World War. One of her points in her books is that in order for people to have rights, they have to be made accessible for them. In practical terms, rights are generally facilitated by states and the governments who operate those states. And as such, when full rights, as mentioned before, have been limited by the type of citizenship and the type of status that people have. So it has been limited by the nationality of a person. In order to have the right to have rights, the government has to give you that opportunity. And this is how Hannah Arendt starts being concerned with statelessness, or those who have been stripped of their connection between their citizenship and the state. And as such, they cannot access those rights, which in other ways are still universal in principle, but in everyday life they are not realizable. Now, statelessness and undocumented status are different. So as we said before, a stateless person is someone who cannot acquire or who cannot claim citizenship from a state, be it because of an anomaly of nationality law or be it because of administrative barriers. Undocumented status is different in the sense that a person does not enjoy a specific legal immigration status in the country where they are at the moment, but were they to return to their country of origin, they are still enjoying their citizenship or their nationality. Now this of course becomes a little bit more blurred when we're talking about undocumented children, because as you see, they might have been born in one country of which they cannot acquire the citizenship, and they might remain undocumented because that state doesn't grant them any other form of status. Yet in order to enjoy any type of nationality, they need to go to a different state of which their parents might be from, but to which they don't feel any connection at all. As you see, there are similarities between statelessness and undocumented status, because those individuals are disconnected from the duty of care that the state has towards individuals living in the territory. So that's why a lot of people often call undocumented children as Hannah Arendt's children, because they have difficulties in securing their right to have rights. Generally, in all children's rights are accessible through their parents or through the state, because until they reach the majority, they cannot enforce their own rights. So either the parents who have the care of them, or either the state who has the care of them, give them their rights. But undocumented children are deprived of certain rights by the virtue of birth in a different state that of their parents. Well, undocumented children do have rights. In fact, some of the instruments, such as the Convention on the Rights of the Child or the Migrant Workers Convention, specifically guarantee them those rights. And again, other human rights instruments, such as like the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, or the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, also have certain rights which can be interpreted as being attributed to all people regardless of legal status. In spite of this all, states routinely deny children and their parents their right due to their lack of legal status. Again, this is what we meant earlier on when we discussed the right to have rights. Different states grant different type of right to children and to undocumented migrants in general. So, for example, certain states will guarantee them right to primary and secondary education, where others will not. Some of them will guarantee them universal access to health, where others will only guarantee them access to emergency care, for example. And very commonly, states deny them the right to access to social protection or the right to adequate housing. So, for example, very often, because parents cannot claim certain benefits or certain social protection rights, children suffer from that. But then again, most importantly, because very commonly states deny children the right to acquire an immigration status at a later stage, or even worse, they deny them the right to have citizenship, we can say that they denied the right to have full rights.
So why should we care?
Well, there are different reasons why we should care about this. So firstly, let's look at it from a human rights perspective. So if we accept that human rights principle exists so that it will guarantee a basic safety net for all of us in society, So it guarantees that safety net that we should not trespass. We also accept that human rights principles come from years of learning from our mistakes, from our state's mistakes, and it's an overall acknowledgement that those mistakes happened and that we want to rectify them and we don't want to reproduce them. So we can say that human rights principles are an expression of our commonality. So it's the concept of our humanity, as how we perceive each other as being the same regardless of our nationality. So then we can say that when human rights are eroded, it's that very expression of commonality which is being targeted. So if we allow those rights to be eroded, to be basically decomposed or destroyed, we are allowing ourselves to repeat the mistakes of the past. So if we also accept that the human rights have to be secured from the bottom up, we should then start with those who are most vulnerable. Children, and in particularly undocumented children, are some of the most vulnerable groups in society, just simply because they cannot advocate for their own rights by themselves. We have to advocate for their rights. So if we apply human rights instruments to ensure the protection of those most vulnerable, so we apply that for the protection of all children regardless of their legal status, then we're actually reinforcing that expression of commonality we mentioned before, and we are reinforcing our beliefs in human rights principles. Secondly, we should care about this from a social policy perspective. So it's also commonly accepted and commonly understood that early childhood intervention is the best way to address inequality. And by targeting inequalities, we achieve social cohesion. So if we restrict access to basic rights for undocumented children, they will inevitably grow up in an unequal society. They will also grow up disadvantaged from their peers. This will lead to intra and intergenerational transmission of disadvantage. So basically means that they will never be able to catch up with their fellow schoolmates or their fellow neighborhood mates in terms of their integration into society. Now, what's the result of that? This will have a very big cost to the state. Now, you can look at it from two angles. More importantly, from a human angle. So basically, you're talking about the distress that a child will experience from growing in poverty, or mainly from growing with that uncertainty of not knowing whether they can be removed or not from the state, whether they can end up in detention, because in certain countries undocumented children can also be put in detention, and also the human cost of not belonging into a place, being constantly told that the only place you know and you call home, it is not your home, and that you can be removed into a different country that is completely foreign and unknown to you, but that you are told that this is where you belong. But moving along from the human cost, we also have the economic cost. As we said before, granting basic rights pushes people into poverty. And poverty has a lot of costs for overall society. There has been proved links between poverty and violence, but also there are proof that disadvantage and the lack of rights will hinder people from realizing their full potential, so their full contribution into society, particularly as these children grow older and they're not able to join, for example, third level education because of their lack of legal status. Then we're losing out on their skills. So if we take an example, certain countries like Ireland allow undocumented children to go to primary and secondary education. Yet, at the age of 18, they cannot find a job. They cannot legally find a job. They cannot go to third level education because they do not have a particular legal status. And as such, we have lost 12 years of investment in their education. that because they cannot either put that into they cannot apply that education into a job. Thirdly, from a sociological point of view, I will argue that the issue of undocumented children reflects back on the perception of our own identity. If we take it from a Foucauldian point of view, and in particular the way Foucault understands biopolitics, we can say that the state uses citizenship and immigration regimes as a means of controlling those who are present in its territory. So this will have immediate impact, but it will also have long-lasting effect in society and in how a nation evolves. So let's look at the example of the Irish state. By making a deliberate decision to restrict how migrants can acquire or transmit citizenship, while at the same time deciding that we want to maintain we also want to promote diasporic citizenship, we're actually redefining Irish identity. So basically we are saying that to certain people here that are born that you cannot be considered Irish, while we are telling certain people who might be 3 generations removed from the territory of Ireland that they are Irish and that they're welcome to be part of this Irish nationhood. So these decisions have to be they have to be understood as forming the construction of the nation state. So there is this idea that the nation is stuck in time, that it doesn't evolve, but that reality is completely disconnected from the challenges of a globalized world. So we have to perceive how nationalism and racism are actually being reinforced by decisions such as granting or refusing citizenship. So I guess that in that way, if we allow the existence of undocumented children, if we allow a certain category of people from being completely alienated from our identity, then we are actually losing the meaning of what the nation state really is, which is that, again, as we said before, that duty of care for the people who live in its territory and that contribution to social cohesion.